Hello, everyone. This is number 6 in my ongoing series dealing with Bible prophecy. And again, the idea here is interpretations of Bible prophecy, Hebrew Bible, and the New Testament throughout history from ancient into modern times. So I'm dealing with the ways these texts have been understood by scholars and historians, by various Jews and Christians throughout time, all the way down through our own time. I've been working through the book of Daniel bit by bit, if you've been following along. And today I want to deal with the last 3 chapters. And then next time I want to give a summary, everything about Daniel, the dating, the authorship, the different views, and so forth. But the last 3 chapters of Daniel has 12 chapters, so 10, 11, and 12 are very, very interesting. It starts out with a vision on the banks of the Tigris River, where Daniel says that he saw this amazing figure. And then he's so struck by the figure that he falls over and goes into a deep sleep, and he receives this prophecy. So 11 and parts of 12 are the prophecy itself, and it is the longest continuous prophecy in the Hebrew Bible. So let's dig in. I'm going to share the screen as I usually do in this series. Some of these things are kind of technical, and so you really need the illustrations to do the right kind of job with this. So I've called this Daniel's final terrifying vision on the Tigris River, Daniel 11 and 12. And what is revealed in the very vision by the angelic messenger that you see pictured here is actually called the Book of Truth. Okay, let's go on. Here's the setting. You can read it with me. I was standing on the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris, and I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a man clothed in linen. Notice the figure is called a man, so he's in human form. But as he's described, he's not like any man that most of us have ever seen. His loins were girded with gold of Uphaz, and his body was like beryl, a jewel color, and his face was like the appearance of lightning, and his eyes like flaming torches, and his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sounds of his words like the noise of a multitude. So you can imagine seeing and hearing this figure as it's related here would be a very frightening thing. And that's when he does fall over into a deep sleep, literally trembling and overcome at what he was experiencing. And then he's told by this angelic figure, as we usually refer to these beings, angel, which actually just means messenger, as many of you know, a heavenly messenger. He's told that the messenger says, I came to make you understand what is to befall your people in the latter days. So we've seen quite a bit about in the last days, the latter days, the appointed time of the end, and the other visions of Daniel so far. If you've missed those videos, you can always go back and watch them and catch up with this idea. So, for the vision is for days yet to come, but I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. So the idea here is an ancient idea that God or the gods would know the future in advance, that there's a book of truth, and the book of truth is a revelation of what's going to come in the latter days, much like the book of Revelation in the New Testament, where the witness John on the Isle of Patmos in the Mediterranean Sea is told in his vision of Jesus of Nazareth. And it is a revelation of Jesus Christ, according to the text. What's going to befall in the last days or at the end, bringing in the end of the age. So Revelation is modeled a lot on Daniel, and particularly chapter 7 and this chapter as well. Some of the numbers are the same, as you're going to see. So once this messenger begins to relay the vision, remember his voice is like a huge multitude, so a huge booming voice. Now I put this in just as a sample, because what you then get for the entire chapter 11 is this rundown of all the rulers from Alexander the Great down to Antiochus Epiphanes. And it gives the history in advance, telling Daniel, who is a person set in the 6th century BCE during the captivity of Nebuchadnezzar and later the Persians who conquer. So he's in the Persian court, basically, listening to this. And so what he's told is there'll be 3 more kings in Persia and a 4th. We're not totally sure who the 4th is, but probably Darius the 3rd, because it goes on to mention or refer to Alexander the Great, not by name. So you've got 3 more kings and then a 4th. He'll be richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he will stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. So remember, the mighty kingdom of Greece, led by Alexander the Great, is now threatening the whole Eastern world, the ancient Near East, the Mediterranean world on the east. Then a mighty king shall arise, definitely Alexander, you can tell very easily by the description, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. He certainly did rule with great dominion. He conquered things all the way to the border of the Indus River in India and all of Persia and so forth, and defeated the Persian king Darius. But when he's arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven. So he doesn't have this long rule over his kingdom, but when he's just a young man, he is struck by a fever, according to some accounts, and he dies. And then his kingdom is divided among his generals, 4 of them, and they're not his posterity, not his children. He did have a son, but the kingdom goes to these 4 generals who are fighting. There is a story that he's asked on his deathbed, who will succeed you? Appoint one of us. And he says, the strongest one. Whether that's true or not, we, of course, don't know. So not to his posterity, nor according to the dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others beside these. So that's where you get kind of a summary of what happened. So an overview would be Alexander dies in 323. His 4 successors, I underline these 2 because the prophecy then begins to focus on the Holy Land, the ancient land of Israel, what the Romans later called Palestine. So the Ptolemies were south in Egypt, and they take over the area of ancient Egypt. And the first ruler, of course, is Ptolemy the First. And then the Seleucids were in the north, in Antioch, Syria, and on up into even Persia. And their first ruler is Seleucus the First. You get this long, complicated history of wars between them, as we're going to see. 5 wars back and forth between them. They're very, very complex. When I was in graduate school at the University of Chicago many, many years ago, I had to take an exam on these successors, who they were one by one and all their wars. It was extremely hard to memorize. I was able to pass. I've forgotten most of the details, but guess what? They're in Daniel chapter 11, because this purports to be prophecy of what's going to happen by Daniel living in the 600s CE, and this is all the way down to the 300s. So 300 plus years later, this is what's going to happen in great detail. Now, basically, to summarize the story, in 200 BC, the Seleucids under Antiochus III, there are 4 Antiochuses that began to rule after Seleucus the First and the Second. And Antiochus is the 3rd, all the way down to 200 BC. He's able to secure the Holy Land, the historic land of Israel, until the victory of the Maccabees, which we have already covered last time, when the Maccabees took over and defeated Antiochus IV Epiphanes. So the reign of the Seleucids over the Holy Land was pretty brief, The Ptolemies had it for most of the time. But in 164, Jewish independence, the Maccabees set up an independent state. It lasted almost exactly 100 years until the Romans came in 63 BC. Now, people living in that time began to think of Rome then as the fourth beast to come, because the kingdom of God did not arrive. And you can see once Rome entered the land as a major kingdom, much larger than even Alexander the Great, you've got to make room for a fourth kingdom. And then history goes on after that. Now, I'm going to give you just a sample. If you just start with these first verses, where it's beginning to tell you about the king of the north and the king of the south. The king of the south, they never use names, is Ptolemy the First. This is how the prophecy starts after Alexander and his successors are appointed. The king of the south, Ptolemy the First, will be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger, and he and his dominion shall be great, a great dominion. And after some years, they will make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south, this is now Ptolemy the Second, the rule is switched, shall come to the king of the north to make peace, but she shall not retain the strength of her arm. So even though she's sent to the king, and he and his offspring will not endure, and she's actually killed in history with her children, and it comes to nothing. In those times, a branch from her roots, happens to be her brother, Ptolemy III, shall arise in his place, and he shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, Seleucus. So this time Egypt comes up and attacks the north, and he will deal with them and shall prevail. But this is actually talking then about the conquering of this area. And he will carry off to Egypt their gods with their molten images and their precious vessels of silver and gold. And for some years, he will refrain from attacking the king of the north. And then the latter will come into the realm of the king of the south, but will return into his own land. Now, why am I going over this? This is not good practice on YouTube if you want to keep your viewers, but I've got some loyal viewers. So stick with me here. There's a point to going through some of this complexity, as we say, diving into the weeds. Okay, so here is a text from my Oxford Annotated Bible. And here you can see right where we are, the king of the south shall be strong, one of his princes will be stronger. And what's nice about this particular edition, and most study Bibles have this, because nobody disagrees on any of this. It's literally the history from Alexander the Great down to Antiochus Epiphanes, king by king, battle by battle, with great details. So we got down to verse 9, and you could see an interpretation. The reference is to the campaign of Seleucus II against Egypt in 242 BC, which came to disaster. And now 10, look at 10. I just want you to see the idea. His son shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall come on and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortresses. And if we go down here, we get Ptolemy the Fourth sent armies through Palestine and defeated Antiochus. And you go on down until you get to verse 21. These verses concern Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes, the contemptible person. Okay, let's look up at verse 21 and just take a look at this. In his place shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning, obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him, and the prince of the covenant also. So that means basically the Jewish people in Jerusalem, and that would be their ruling priest. They don't have a king at this time. Remember, we covered that last time. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with the small people. Without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he will do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done. So in other words, Antiochus IV is different. What does he do? Let's go on. Scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He will devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. He will stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall wage war with him, and so forth. At the time appointed, now notice, it's as if we've given verse 20 through 28 to one ruler, Antiochus Epiphanes. So it's like you start like this very broadly with Alexander the Great, and you go down like this in terms of focus, and then you get down to Antiochus Epiphanes, and then you're going to give great detail about him. So as we've seen before in chapter 7, in chapter 8, in chapter 9, and now in chapter 11, the details are focused on this evil ruler who's presented in this book as the final evil ruler. Or is he? I pause and ask, as we'll see. At the time appointed, he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before. For ships of Kittim, that is Rome, will come against him, and he'll be afraid and withdraw and have to turn back and take action against the Holy Covenant. So the reason he attacked Judea and the Jewish people in Judea and Galilee is, we think, because he wanted money. He wanted to sack the temple, which had a great deal of gifts and offerings of the Jewish people worldwide that had been collecting now for hundreds of years. And he shall turn back. And so we're going to go to the next page here. And he will give heed to those who forsake the Holy Covenant. So this is Antiochus Epiphanes, the fourth. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the continual burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. So I want you all to see this. I don't care what people say today or in the future, or in the Middle Ages, or even in the time of Jesus. This is around 167 BC down to 164. And this was literally done by Antiochus Epiphanes. And so when you talk about the desolating sacrilege right here that is set up in the holy place and the offering stopped, you're talking about what he did. This is recounted in the book of Maccabees. Once again, read the first 4 or 5 chapters of First Maccabees and you get the story. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant. So the idea would be those people who he makes a covenant with them, that if they will turn from Judaism and make a covenant with the gods of the Hellenistic world, Zeus and all his entourage, they'll be saved. Otherwise, they'll be killed. But the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. And those among the people who are wise will make many understand. That's obviously the Maccabees. Though they will fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plunder for some days. When they fall, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. And some of those who are wise shall fall, to refine and cleanse them, and to make them white, until the time of the end, for it is yet the time appointed. Now, when I was studying this years ago, I put a big red asterisk at verse 36. And I'll explain why in just a minute. So now let me explain something about the language in this vision, and you can start in chapter 11 and trace it on through. When it says, and the king shall do according to his will, you would assume that this would be Antiochus Epiphanes. It's talking about the king of the north, right? That's where we were in the previous page that we looked at. But all the way through the prophecy of Daniel 11, king of the north is whoever's ruling in the north. Okay, so it's Seleucus the first, Seleucus the second, Antiochus the first, the second, the third, and now the fourth. So it wouldn't necessarily have to be Antiochus. We're going to look at it. Hold on. And it's the same thing with the king of the south. It begins, of course, with Ptolemy the first, and Ptolemy the second and so forth, but then it moves on down in history with other people of that dynasty. And it doesn't say another person will come necessarily every time. Sometimes it does. But it's basically two tracks, King of the North, King of the South. And that's going to continue till the end of the chapter. So when you suddenly say it is yet until the time of the end, it is yet for the time appointed, that phrase at the end of verse 35 offers the possibility of this being a different figure, a kind of Antiochus-like figure, okay? Do you see the idea? It's still the king of the north, but so is Antiochus the first, second, third, and fourth. So is there another Antiochus-like person, especially since there seems to be this break right here? Now, what is this king, whoever it is? Maybe it is Antiochus, but let's read it. And the king shall do according to his will. He will exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods, and he will prosper until the indignation is completed. So that always refers, remember in chapter 8, that the indignation has to be fulfilled, the kind of anger of the Gentiles against the Jewish people. For what is determined shall be done. But look at this. He will give no heed to the gods of his fathers. Well, Antiochus the Fourth is pretty loyal to Zeus, who is the chief god of Greek culture. So that doesn't seem to fit. It seems to be somebody who's going to change. Or to the one beloved by women. He will not give heed to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. So this is where you first get the idea that people develop of a so-called antichrist. That word is not used, of course, but the idea, I like to just say, a final evil ruler that ushers in the end of the age. Then, verse 40 through 45, predictions that Ptolemy will provoke another war with disastrous results, and Antiochus will conquer Libya to the west of Egypt and Ethiopia to the south, but on his way back will perish somewhere along the route. None of these predictions was fulfilled. You get this final section, verse 40, which connects with this, until the time of the end, for it is yet appointed. And then you have this king described, but then here, this never happened. Nobody ever argues that this happened. So it makes me think that whoever wrote this right here, 36 on to the end, if it's the original author or not, of Daniel, and we're not sure who that is if it's not Daniel, these events are something that is being predicted but never happened. In other words, Antiochus definitely didn't do this. Notice, at the time of the end, the king of the south will attack him. That's Egypt. He wasn't attacked by Egypt. The king of the north will rush upon him. He goes down to Egypt with chariots and horsemen and ships, come into countries, overflow, pass through. He'll come into the glorious land. Tens of thousands will fall. Well, he's already done that here. So now it's seeming to say he'll do it again, whoever this is. And tens of thousands will fall, and these shall be delivered out of his hand, Edom and Moab in the main part of Ammon. So on the east side of the Jordan, he doesn't take that part. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He'll become ruler of the treasures of gold and silver and all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow in his train. But tidings from the east and north will alarm him, and he will go forth with great fury to exterminate and utterly destroy many. He will pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain. That's between Jerusalem and the Mediterranean Sea. Yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. Now, it keeps going, so ignore the chapter. At that time, when he's being defeated, Michael, who's the great prince of Israel, the archangel over Israel, and he's mentioned earlier in chapter 10, the one who's revealing this to Daniel, according to the text, is not named, but probably Gabriel. because he mentions my fellow Michael. And here, Michael, who's over the Jewish people, rises up. He's in charge of your people. These angels are in charge of different countries. It's a Jewish view in this period. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never has been since there was a nation until that time. But at that time, your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and contempt. And those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, this is the end of the vision, shut up the words, seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Now, I'm going to talk about this next time, this final ending. But Daniel is told at the end, go your way, as you're going to die, till the end. You will rest, remember those who sleep in the dust, and will stand in your allotted place at the end of days. So let me just stop the share and kind of review some points here. So what you get in chapter 11 is this very detailed history of the period from Alexander the Great and his four successors to the ruler Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay, we've seen that. And it's done under the guise of King of the North, King of the South, King of the North, King of the South, using those symbolic names for these different rulers, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. That's very easy to trace. It's very accurate. All the interpreters agree. So according to the book of Daniel, Daniel was given a revelation in great detail of every little thing that would happen from Alexander the Great all the way down, who would rule and who would be defeated in this battle and that battle and this invasion. And he will seduce the Jews who are willing to lose their faith with flattery and all kinds of offers of Greek culture. Read First Maccabees again, it describes all of this. And those who are wise, who will not turn away from God, he will persecute and kill. But finally, he's going to be defeated. But notice in this text, the Maccabees don't come in. His defeat is not narrated. And then when you get to the time of the end with verse 40, you're supposed to be picking up, you would think, with the same person, but then he's described in a way that I don't think really fits Antiochus Epiphanes. He dedicated everything to Zeus, and that was in keeping with his whole culture as this Seleucid king and successor of Alexander. So, what about those final verses leading up to chapter 12, which is this terrible time of trouble on the Jewish people? Unprecedented in history, and yet they're finally delivered. And there's the resurrection of the dead and a kind of a judgment, because those who have done good are rewarded, those who've done evil are punished, those who sleep in the dust as they're described. So what happens in Daniel is very interesting. I'm not going to review the whole book, but chapter 2 has the four kingdoms, and we don't get a lot of specifics other than a stone is going to come and destroy all these kingdoms when you get down to the end of the feet and the toes, which are clay mixed with iron and very unstable. Chapter 7, a little horn, which fits Antiochus pretty well, the fourth beast. Chapter 8, definitely Antiochus, pollutes the temple, 1150 days, the 2300 mornings and evenings of the daily sacrifice. The sacrifice is twice a day. So if he stops sacrifices, it's 2300 mornings and evenings, as it says, morning and evening sacrifices, 1150 days. And then you get to chapter 9, and you get the same thing. The prince who is to come comes in and invades, and he's desolates and sets up the desolating sacrilege. And then you get to chapter 11, and you get Antiochus doing the same thing. So the book is so focused on the time of the Maccabees and Antiochus, but it really doesn't cover the victory they had in the full way, because when the Maccabees defeated Antiochus and he was run back home and out of the country and eventually perished, nothing happened like you read in chapter 11 from verse 40 on into chapter 12. None of that happened. So that's why Daniel could always be read as ending with Antiochus Epiphanes almost, and then a pause, and then a final scenario that would involve an Antiochus-like figure arising again. I'll leave you there. Take a look at that. One time in your life, you should read aloud chapter 11 into chapter 12 of Daniel, because I want you to get the full weeds, you might say, of the details. And if you have a study Bible, you can follow along the notes and you can look at this video and pause it and see at the bottom these different rulers and what they're supposed to do. Now, what I want to do next time is take an overview of the entire book, all the visions we've surveyed, and then talk about how critical historians read these texts and how there's another way to read the text that lends itself to a continual reappropriation down through the ages, a kind of a slippage where I could take these texts and reapply them to Rome, which is not in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. It's 100 years before the Romans come in. But they could be applied then, and they could be applied later, even in the first few centuries of the Christian era, all down through the Middle Ages, and right down to our own time, where people are expecting this king of the north to come again. And then we'll leave Daniel behind, and it's going to come up again as we go through different interpretations in this series. But we'll take a look next at the different prophecies in the Hebrew Bible of the arrival of the Davidic Messiah. What do we know about him? When is he coming? What is he supposed to do? And we'll ask questions about if anybody ever claims to fulfill those things, how does that person stack up against the prophecies? And after that, we have some other things in mind, but that takes you ahead a little bit. Take care, everybody. I hope you benefited from this. Take care, everybody. Till next.